A battle over religious freedom. Pastors in Houston have taken a stand after the city subpoenaed their sermons.
It's all part of a battle over a city ordinance on gay rights. Houston has backed down somewhat, and now the pastors are getting some help from one of the top conservative voices in the country. David Brody brings us the story from Houston.
The Lone Star State slogan, "Don't mess with Texas," could now be expanded to "Don't mess with Texas pastors."
Senator Cruz, please come share with us about it.
Thursday in Houston, Senator Ted Cruz came to his home church to give city officials a lesson on religious liberty.
The city of Houston has no power, no legal authority to silence the church.
The controversy began over a city ordinance that not only bans discrimination against LGBT people, it also allows them to choose which bathroom they want to use. That's when pastors here said enough.
There's no such thing as anti-gay in the course of this and all, but we are for God's standard of morality.
Citizens signed petitions to overturn the ordinance and gathered enough to force a vote, but the Houston City Council declared the signatures invalid. The Christian advocates behind the petition sued. In an attempt to fight back, the city demanded to see sermons, texts, emails, or any correspondence whatsoever from pastors against the ordinance. That would have included any preaching about homosexuality or gender identity. Pastors said, no way. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, Cruz says he hopes Christians take notice of what's happening here.
Is this a situation where a sleeping giant has awoke? What is your sense here?
I think it may well be, and I certainly hope that it is. I never imagined we would see this kind of hostility to faith here in Houston.
Neither can Pastor Khan, who came to America from Vietnam to get away from persecution. Now his name is on the government hit list.
This is what's going on, that they censor all the sermon. Pastors have to submit our worship service program, and they have to approve it before we can conduct our service. That's why I run away from Vietnam.
While Senator Cruz and the pastors came to the church with their take, city officials have a much different take. They are trying to downplay the fact that this is an attack on religious liberty.
Houston's gay mayor is pushing the LGBT ordinance. She says her pastoral critics don't understand the concept of unconditional love, and she's downplaying the controversy too.
People are rightly concerned if a government entity tries to in any way inhibit religious speech. That is not the intent.
The city now says it will narrow the subpoenas and not require all the information it originally wanted. Pastors here aren't buying it.
The mayor and the city attorney, they did this. This is not an accident. This is not some pro bono attorney who did it and they didn't know. This was their plan all along. They just thought no one would stand up and say anything.
And they were wrong. Cruz says pastors must lead the way or the future may look even worse.
And so the specter of government trying to determine if what pastors preach from the pulpit meets with the policy views or political correctness of the governing authorities, that prospect is real and it's happening now.
In Houston, though, pastors are ready for the fight, whatever the cost. David Brody, CBN News, in Houston, Texas.
Well, I hope this case reverberates throughout the nation, and I hope there's political action that comes from it. What's going on here is the repression of free speech. And it's repression of political speech. And I think what the subpoena was aimed at is somehow have these churches violated IRS statutes regarding political speech. There was a bill in Congress allowing the removal of all the restrictions on political speech from the pulpit. And that bill needs to get resurrected and passed again so we get rid of this nonsense that there's a true separation of church and the state. The state can't come in and interfere with what the church does. Well, you can see more of David's exclusive interview with Senator Cruz on the Brody File on CBNnews.com. In other news, Congress is demanding answers about the government's response to Ebola here in America. John Jessup has that story from the CBN newsroom. John?
Gordon, there are growing questions about how the healthcare system has treated Ebola so far here in the U.S. and the possibility of travel restrictions into the country. Charlene Aaron has more.
With Americans on high alert after a second nurse contracted Ebola in the U.S., lawmakers are demanding answers from the nation's top health officials. Thursday, CDC Director Tom Frieden faced tough questions from members of Congress about the CDC's ability to contain an Ebola outbreak.
Dr. Frieden, a second nurse affected with Ebola took a flight to Cleveland after she registered a fever. We have reports that says she contacted the CDC and was told she could fly. Did she in fact call the CDC and ask for guidance on boarding a commercial flight, as far as you know?
My understanding is that she did contact CDC, and we discussed with her report of symptoms as well as other evaluation.
People's lives are at stake, and the response so far has been unacceptable.
Some lawmakers pressed officials on why travel restrictions are not in place for passengers coming from Ebola-affected countries in West Africa, especially since nearly 30 African countries have imposed travel bans. President Obama says he might appoint an Ebola czar to coordinate the fight against the virus in the U.S., but he remains opposed to a ban on travel from West Africa.
The problem is that in all the discussions I've had thus far with experts in the field, is that a travel ban is less effective than the measures that we are currently instituting.
Meanwhile, the first U.S. healthcare worker diagnosed with Ebola is talking and sitting up in her hospital bed. In this video, Nina Pham wipes away tears before being transferred to a special isolation unit at a Maryland facility.
Happy Maryland, everybody.
Party Maryland.
The second nurse, Amber Vinson, is being treated at Atlanta's Emory University. The investigation continues as to how the two nurses contracted the virus. And despite assurances from the White House and the CDC, Americans are still concerned that the government isn't on top of the Ebola situation. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
ISIS has reportedly publicly executed at least 2 of its own fighters on charges of spying and embezzlement. The London Independent reports that information came from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Unconfirmed reports say the men were beheaded, although it is possible they may have been crucified. Well, with Christians facing severe attacks from ISIS and other Muslims in the Middle East, Jews are now joining forces with Christians to fight the growing persecution of believers in Islamic countries. Chris Mitchell has that story.
When hundreds of thousands of Christians, men, women, and children are killed, this isn't a war. This is genocide. And Jews know what happens when the world is silent to genocide.
As head of the World Jewish Congress, Ron Lauder advocates for Jewish people around the world. Now he's teaming up with the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem and Empowered 21 to fight Christian persecution.
What's happened to the Christians, they're being massacred and killed. Something like 120,000 were killed last year, and no one says anything. Everyone is focusing on Gaza.
The World Jewish Congress, Empowered 21, and the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem sent a letter recently to more than 100 world leaders, calling on them to take up the cause of persecuted Christians in Muslim countries. Together, these 3 groups represent millions around the world.
For the first time, to my knowledge, in modern history, probably even in the history of Jewish-Christian relations, a Jewish organization and a Christian organization are joining in a letter to protect Christians in the Middle East.
There has simply been a horrendous thing that has been going on. Christianity is dwindling in the Middle East, and we believe it should be growing.
Canon Andrew White, known as the Vicar of Baghdad, told of ISIS persecuting Christians in Iraq.
The children said, "We have always followed Yeshua. We will never leave Yeshua." They all had their heads chopped off. This is the kind of terror that we are facing.
Lauder encouraged more than 4,000 Christians from 80 nations at the Feast of Tabernacles celebration to fight together.
In Paul's second letter to Timothy, he wrote, God did not give us the spirit of fear, but the spirit of power. Do not fear, have courage, have strength, and as one, Christians and Jews we will be strengthened together, and we will not fail. Shalom.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
Thanks, Chris. Gordon, this is such an important issue, not just for the church, but really for all of humanity.
Oh, I love what was said at the end of that piece, Christian and Jews standing together. Israelis know a great deal about Islam and what that means for their personal safety, and how Islam has been fanning the flames of jihad to drive Israel into the sea. We all need to be educated on this and the roots of it. There's a disinformation campaign going on right now that somehow claims Islam is a religion of peace. Get educated on it. We've got something for you. It's called Islam, Religion of Peace or War, and you'll find out in it why ISIS is actually following the commandments in the Quran. Every time they cut off someone's head, they're following a dictate from Muhammad. You need to get educated on this, and we've got this for you. It's absolutely free. All you have to do is call us, 1-800-759-0700. We'll mail it to you, or we can email you a PDF file right away. Get educated on what the roots of Islam are, how these so-called extremists are actually purists. They're following exactly what the Quran commands them to do, and we need to understand the roots of this. It's not some symptom, it's the root that's causing this violence and this kind of terror and this kind of activity in the Middle East.
A North Carolina magistrate has resigned rather than perform same-sex marriages. Rockingham County Magistrate John Callum Jr. wrote marrying gay couples would desecrate holy institution established by God himself. The resignation came just a day after state magistrates were ordered to carry out same-sex marriages or face suspension and possibly dismissal. In the midst of the Ebola crisis, Operation Blessing has provided some much-needed help to an orphanage in Liberia. A compassionate woman, affectionately known as Mother Edith, offers many of these children a loving home, food, and an education at Hope in Christ Orphanage, but supplies were running low. Operation Blessing teams are helping provide food and chlorine for hand washing and disinfecting surfaces to protect the children from Ebola. Teams are also delivering food to families under quarantine and providing protective gear to medical personnel. Remember, you can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to its website, ob.org.